The hay beneath her body had never felt so comfortable, despite the fact that Lucy Winters was sleeping in a horse stable with nothing but her worn traveling dress and a thin shawl for warmth on this cold Montana night in October of 1877. She had stumbled into Paradise, Montana, 3 days earlier with empty pockets, an emptier stomach, and nowhere else to turn after the stagecoach she had been traveling on broke down 30 miles south, leaving her stranded when she could not afford the fare to continue her journey to her aunt's home in Helena. Lucy stirred as the first rays of dawn crept through the slats of the stable wall, but what truly woke her was the rich aroma of fresh coffee and something else, something warm and inviting that made her stomach clench with hunger. Her eyes fluttered open to find a tall man standing just inside the stable door, silhouetted against the early morning light, holding a tray with what appeared to be a full breakfast. "I figured you might be hungry," the man said, his voice deep and gentle, lacking any trace of judgment or cruelty. "Name's Robert Yates. I own this ranch." Lucy sat up quickly, hay falling from her dark hair, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and fear. She had been so careful to slip into the stable late at night and leave before dawn, but exhaustion must have finally caught up with her. "I'm so sorry, sir." "I'll leave right away. I didn't mean to trespass. I just had nowhere else to go, and I thought, just for a few nights until I figured something out." "Easy now," Robert said, moving closer and setting the tray down on a wooden crate near where she had been sleeping. "I'm not here to run you off. I've known you were here for 2 nights now. Figured you needed the rest more than I needed to make a fuss about it." Lucy stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time as her eyes adjusted to the light. He was probably in his late 20s, with sandy brown hair that fell slightly over his forehead, warm hazel eyes that seemed kind despite the weathered lines around them that spoke of hard work under the Montana sun, and a strong jaw that was currently sporting a few days' worth of stubble. He wore simple ranch clothes, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, brown trousers, and worn leather boots. "I don't understand," Lucy said softly, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why would you let me stay? Why bring me breakfast?" "Because you looked like you needed help, and I was raised to help folks when they need it," Robert replied simply. He gestured to the tray, which held scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter and jam, and that wonderful-smelling coffee. "Please eat. We can talk after you've got some food in you. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." He was right about that. Lucy's last proper meal had been nearly a week ago, before she left her position as a governess in a wealthy household in Denver. The family had decided they no longer needed her services when their children were sent off to boarding school, and Lucy had used her meager savings to buy passage to Helena, where her only living relative, an aunt she barely remembered, supposedly lived. But things had gone wrong, as they so often did in her life, and now she was here, sleeping in a stranger's stable and being offered kindness she did not know how to accept. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for the coffee first. The warmth of the tin cup in her hands felt like a blessing, and the first sip was like heaven. She had to force herself not to gulp it down and burn her tongue. Robert settled himself on another crate across from her, giving her space but not leaving, which made her both nervous and oddly comforted. "Where are you from?" he asked after giving her time to eat a few bites of the eggs. "Denver, most recently," Lucy answered between bites, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite her ravenous hunger. "Before that, St. Louis. I was working as a governess, but the position ended. I was trying to get to Helena to stay with my aunt, but the stagecoach broke down, and I didn't have enough money to continue." "Helena's a good 50 miles north of here," Robert observed. "That's a long way to go with no money and no provisions." I was hoping to find work here in paradise, but I've asked at every business in town. No one needs a governess, and they already have enough people for the other positions." Lucy finished the eggs and started on the bacon, her embarrassment at her situation warring with her gratitude for the food. Robert was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something carefully. Lucy noticed the way his jaw worked slightly, as if he was chewing on words before speaking them aloud. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Winters," he said, and Lucy's heart sank. She had heard such words before from men who thought a woman alone and desperate would agree to anything. Her hand tightened on the coffee cup, and she prepared to run, breakfast or no breakfast. Robert must have seen something in her expression because he quickly held up his hands. "Not that kind of proposition, I swear on my mother's grave. A business arrangement, if you will, though I admit it's a bit unconventional." "What kind of arrangement?" Lucy asked warily, though something in his eyes made her want to trust him. "I need a wife," Robert said bluntly. "This ranch is a good spread, over 500 acres with decent water rights and good grazing land. I've built it up over the past 6 years since I came to Montana, and it's profitable enough. But I'm tired of coming home to an empty house. Tired of cooking my own meals and mending my own clothes. Tired of being alone, and there's more to it than that. The bank in town is more willing to extend credit to married men with families. They see it as stability, proof that a man's going to stick around and make good on his debts." Lucy stared at him, the biscuit in her hand forgotten. "You're asking me to marry you. You don't even know me." "I know you're desperate enough to sleep in my stable but proud enough to only take what you absolutely need to survive. I checked the feed bins and the tack room. You didn't steal anything, even though you could have sold my equipment and had enough money to get to Helena. That tells me you're honest. I know you were a governess, which means you're educated and can probably help me with the ranch books because numbers aren't my strong suit. And I know you're alone in this world, which means you might be willing to take a chance on a life that could be better than the one you're leaving behind." "This is insane," Lucy said, but she did not get up to leave. "People don't just marry strangers." "They do out here more often than you'd think," Robert replied. "I've got neighbors who met through letters and got married the day the bride stepped off the stagecoach. At least we've talked face to face, and you've slept under my roof, so to speak. Look, I'm not expecting love or anything like that. This would be a partnership. You'd have a home, food, security. I'd have someone to help run the household and maybe make this place feel less lonely. We'd be helping each other out." Lucy's mind raced. This was absolutely mad, and yet, what were her options? She could continue to paradise and hope for work that clearly was not coming. She could try to walk 50 miles to Helena with no guarantee her aunt was even still alive or willing to take her in. Or she could starve. Or worse, she could end up in a situation where she was forced to compromise herself in ways that would haunt her forever. "Would you expect me to share your bed?" she asked quietly, her cheeks burning but needing to know the truth. Robert's own face colored slightly. "Eventually, I'd hope we might if we found we suited each other in that way, but I wouldn't force anything on you. The house has 2 bedrooms. You'd have your own space until such time as you decided otherwise. I'm not a monster, Miss Winters. I'm just a lonely man looking for a partner in this life." "How old are you?" Lucy asked, realizing she was actually considering this madness. 27. "You?" 22. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sounds of the ranch beginning around them. Lucy could hear chickens clucking in the yard, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the soft nickering of horses in their stalls. It was peaceful here, she realized. More peaceful than anywhere she had been in a long time. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she finally asked. "Take the day," Robert said, standing up. "I've got work to do around the ranch. You're welcome to stay in the house instead of out here. The front door's unlocked. There's a bedroom upstairs, first door on the right. It has a lock on the inside if that makes you feel safer. There's a wash basin and clean water, and you can help yourself to anything in the kitchen. Tonight, I'll make us dinner, and you can give me your answer then." "Fair enough." Lucy nodded, still too overwhelmed to fully process what was happening. Robert tipped his hat to her and walked out of the stable, leaving her alone with the remains of her breakfast and thoughts that tumbled over each other like stones in a river. She finished eating slowly, savoring every bite, then made her way across the yard to the ranch house. It was a solid structure, built of logs with a stone chimney, larger than she had expected. Inside, she found it clean and well-maintained, though definitely lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was simple but well-made. The floors were swept, but there were no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls, no softness to the space. Lucy climbed the stairs and found the bedroom he had mentioned. It was small but pleasant, with a real bed, not just a cot, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the rolling hills of the ranch. She locked the door as he had said she could, then went to the wash basin and poured water from the pitcher into the bowl. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser, Lucy barely recognized herself. Her dark hair was tangled and full of hay, her face was smudged with dirt, and her green eyes looked too large in her thin face. When had she become this desperate creature? She washed as best she could, working the tangles from her hair with her fingers, wishing desperately for a proper bath and clean clothes. When she was as presentable as possible given her circumstances, she went back downstairs and began to explore the house more thoroughly. The kitchen was the largest room, with a good cast iron stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking supplies. Lucy found herself automatically noting what was there and what was missing. No proper spice rack, no good mixing bowls, no cookie jar or bread box. The pantry was well stocked with basics but lacked variety. In the main room, which served as a parlor, there was a fireplace, 2 chairs, and a small desk covered with papers that she assumed were ranch business. She did not look closely, not wanting to invade his privacy more than she already was by being in his home. She spent the day in a strange state of unreality, sometimes sitting in one of the chairs and trying to imagine living here, sometimes standing at the window and watching Robert work with his horses in the corral. He was good with them, she noticed, patient and firm but never cruel. He had 2 ranch hands who came and went, doing various tasks, and he treated them with respect, working alongside them rather than just giving orders. What kind of man was Robert Yates? What had brought him to Montana? What dreams did he have beyond finding a wife to ease his loneliness? And more importantly, could she really tie her life to his based on nothing more than a breakfast and a desperate need for survival? As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink, Lucy smelled something cooking. She went to the kitchen and found Robert at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. "I hope you like stew," he said without turning around. "It's about the only thing I cook well besides breakfast." "It smells wonderful," Lucy said honestly. "Can I help with anything?" "There's bread in the box there if you want to slice it," he replied. "And you can set the table if you like." They worked in comfortable silence, and Lucy was surprised by how natural it felt. When they sat down to eat, the stew proved to be as good as it smelled, rich with beef and vegetables. And the bread, though clearly bought from town rather than homemade, was fresh enough. "Have you thought about my proposal?" Robert asked after they had both eaten enough to take the edge off their hunger, Lucy set down her spoon and looked at him directly. I have. I've thought about little else all day, and I have questions. That's fair. Ask away. Why me? Surely there are women in town who would be interested in marrying a successful rancher. Women you've actually courted and know something about. Robert took a drink of his coffee before answering. There are a few unmarried women in paradise, yes. But most of them are either too young or already being courted by other men. And the ones who are available, well, I've known them for years now, and there's no spark there, no possibility of it. When I saw you in the stable, something just felt right. I can't explain it better than that. What if we marry, and then discover we cannot stand each other? Then we'll be in the same boat as half the married couples in America, Robert said with a slight smile. But I like to think we're both reasonable people who can work through difficulties. And if it truly becomes unbearable, well, divorce is possible, though not easy or pleasant. Would you want children? Lucy asked, her cheeks flushing again at the intimate nature of the question. Someday, yes, I'd like a family, but there's no rush on that front. Like I said, I won't push you into anything you're not ready for. Lucy took a deep breath. She had spent the entire day weighing her options, looking at the reality of her situation from every angle. She could say no, leave in the morning and take her chances on the road to Helena. Or she could say yes and build a new life here with this stranger who seemed kind, but could be hiding any number of faults. But there was something else too, something she had barely admitted to herself as she watched him work with his horses, as she explored his home and imagined herself in it. Robert Yates was attractive, not just in his appearance but in his calm confidence, his straightforward honesty. And when he looked at her, she did not see pity or contempt, but rather a kind of hopeful possibility. I'll marry you, she said quietly. But I want your word that you'll keep your promise about giving me my own space until I'm ready for more. Robert's face broke into a genuine smile, and Lucy felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. You have my word, Miss Winters. I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow and talk to the preacher. We can be married tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. That's very fast, Lucy said, feeling dizzy. No point in waiting once a decision's been made, Robert replied. But if you need more time, just say so. No, Lucy heard herself say. Tomorrow is fine, but I don't have anything appropriate to wear. Robert considered this. My mother's things are still packed away upstairs. She passed away 5 years ago, but I could never bring myself to get rid of her clothes. She was about your size, maybe a bit taller. You're welcome to look through them and see if there's something suitable. After dinner, Robert showed her to a small storage room upstairs where several trunks held his mother's possessions. Lucy felt strange going through a dead woman's belongings, but she found a simple but beautiful dress in a deep blue that would work perfectly. There were also other clothes, practical day dresses and undergarments, nightgowns and shawls, all carefully preserved. Take whatever you need, Robert said from the doorway. She would have wanted her things to be used rather than sitting in a trunk gathering dust. That night, Lucy lay in the small bedroom, wearing one of Mrs. Yates' nightgowns, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the smartest decision she had ever made. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Robert Yates, wife to a man she had known for barely a day, mistress of a ranch in Montana, tied forever to this place and this stranger. She should have been terrified, and part of her was. But another part, a part she was only beginning to acknowledge, was excited. There was something about Robert that drew her, something steady and real in a world that had shown her very little stability. And there was something about the ranch itself, about the wide open spaces and the clean air and the sense of possibility that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, She was finally coming home. The next morning, Lucy woke to find Robert had already left for town. There was a note on the kitchen table saying he would be back by noon and that she should make herself at home. She spent the morning taking a proper bath in the wash basin, heating water on the stove and carrying it upstairs, then carefully dressing in the blue gown she had chosen. It fit reasonably well, though she had to take in the waist slightly with some quick stitching. She was just finishing with her hair when she heard the sound of a wagon in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Robert climbing down, along with an older man she assumed was the preacher. There was also a woman with them, plump and cheerful-looking, who must be the preacher's wife. Lucy took a deep breath, smoothed down her skirt, and went downstairs to meet her fate. The ceremony was short and simple, conducted in the parlor with the preacher's wife and Robert's 2 ranch hands as witnesses. Lucy spoke her vows in a voice that only trembled slightly, and Robert's voice was firm and sure when he promised to honor and cherish her. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Robert leaned in and gave her the briefest kiss on the cheek, so quick and chaste that it was over before Lucy could even register the warmth of his lips against her skin. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Yates," Robert said softly, and Lucy felt the full weight of what she had just done settle over her like a blanket. The preacher and his wife stayed for a small meal that the wife had thoughtfully brought with her, a ham and some fresh baked rolls, along with a pie for dessert. They were kind people, curious about Lucy but too polite to pry too much, and they left in the late afternoon with wishes for happiness and an invitation to attend services on Sunday. When they were gone and the ranch hands had returned to their work, Lucy and Robert stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward with each other now that they were legally bound. "I suppose I should show you around the ranch properly," Robert said, "if you're up for a walk." "I'd like that," Lucy replied, grateful for something to do. They spent the next few hours walking the property, Robert pointing out the boundaries of his land, showing her the creek that ran through the north pasture, the best grazing areas, and his plans for expansion. He talked about the cattle he hoped to buy next spring, about the challenges of ranching in Montana with its harsh winters and unpredictable weather, and about the community in Paradise and the neighboring ranches. Lucy listened, asked questions, and began to see not just the land but Robert's vision for it. He was not just a rancher trying to make a living. He was building something, creating a legacy, and now she was part of that whether she had fully realized it or not. As they walked back to the house in the gathering dusk, Robert said, "I know this isn't a traditional marriage, Lucy. I know we're starting from a strange place, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work, to building a real partnership with you. I hope you'll give us a chance." "I will," Lucy promised, and she meant it. She had cast her lot with this man, and she was not the type to give up easily. That night, they ate a simple supper together. Then Robert excused himself to his bedroom, reminding Lucy that hers was available whenever she wanted to retire. Lucy stayed up a bit longer, washing the dishes and tidying the kitchen, feeling strange and out of place and yet oddly content. Over the next few weeks, Lucy settled into her new life with a determination that surprised even herself. She took over the cooking and cleaning, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort in the ranch house. She made curtains from fabric Robert bought for her in town, hung pictures that had been stored away, and slowly transformed the house into a real home. She also began helping Robert with the ranch books, as he had hoped she would. Her education had included mathematics, and she found she had a knack for organizing the accounts and tracking expenses. Together, they would sit at the desk in the evening, going over the numbers, planning for the future, their heads bent close together over the ledgers. It was during these quiet evening sessions that Lucy began to truly know her husband. She learned that he had come to Montana from Kansas after his mother's death, wanting a fresh start and the freedom that the West promised. She learned that he loved horses more than cattle but kept cattle because they were more profitable. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she least expected it. And Robert learned about Lucy too, about her childhood in St. Louis, orphaned at 12 when her parents died of influenza, about the years in various households as she worked her way up from maid to governess, about her dreams of having a real home and family of her own someday. They were building something, slowly but surely, a foundation of friendship and respect that Lucy had not anticipated when she agreed to this arrangement. One evening in late November, as the first real snow of the season began to fall, Lucy was preparing dinner when Robert came in from the cold, stamping his feet and brushing snow from his hat. "It's really coming down out there," he said. "We're in for a hard winter, I think." "Then I'm glad I'm not sleeping in your stable anymore," Lucy replied with a small smile, stirring the pot of beans on the stove. Robert hung up his coat and came to stand near the stove, warming his hands. "I'm glad, too. I can't imagine this place without you now. You've made it feel like a real home, Lucy." Something in his voice made Lucy look up at him, and she was startled by the warmth in his eyes, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. Her heart began to beat faster, and she suddenly became acutely aware of how close he was standing, close enough that she could smell the cold air and pine scent that clung to him. "Robert," she said softly, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek for just a moment. "I know we agreed to take things slow, and I'm still committed to that. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond just partnership and friendship. You've become very dear to me, Lucy." Lucy's breath caught. She had felt it too, this growing attachment, this awareness of him that went beyond mere gratitude or companionship. When he was out working and she was in the house, she found herself looking out the window to catch glimpses of him. When they sat together in the evening, she was conscious of every movement he made, every glance he sent her way. And at night, lying alone in her bed, she had begun to wonder what it would be like to cross the hall to his room, to not be alone anymore. "You've become dear to me too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less weathered by the hard work of ranching. Yes," Lucy confirmed, feeling her own lips curve upward. "I know this started as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became something more, at least for me." "For me too," Robert said. He hesitated, then asked, "May I kiss you? A real kiss this time, not just the peck the preacher required." In answer, Lucy set down her spoon and turned to face him fully. Robert cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first, then deepening as Lucy responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Robert rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks now." "So have I," Lucy confessed. That night after dinner, Lucy did not go to her separate bedroom. Instead, she took Robert's hand and let him lead her to his room, their room now, and they came together as husband and wife in truth, not just in name. Robert was gentle and patient, making sure Lucy felt safe and cherished, and in his arms, Lucy finally understood what it meant to truly belong to someone and have them belong to you. The winter passed in a blur of snow and cold and warm nights spent wrapped in each other's arms. Lucy had never been happier, and from the way Robert held her close and whispered his love for her in the darkness, she knew he felt the same. When spring finally came, bringing with it the promise of new life and new beginnings, Lucy discovered she was pregnant. She told Robert one morning at breakfast, her heart in her throat, not sure how he would react to the news coming so soon. But Robert's face lit up with such pure joy that all her fears melted away. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing like a boy, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "We're going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Lucy asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Robert replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You've given me everything, Lucy. A home, a partner, and now a family. I love you so much." "I love you too," Lucy said against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I was so lost when I came here, sleeping in your stable with nowhere else to go. And you saved me, Robert. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "We saved each other," Robert corrected gently. "I was just as lost in my own way, rattling around in this empty house with nothing but work to fill my days. You brought light and laughter and love. You made everything better." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Lucy bloomed under Robert's attentive care, and he insisted she rest more and not overwork herself. He hired a woman from town to come help with the heavier housework, and he was constantly worrying about whether Lucy was eating enough, resting enough, happy enough. In September of 1878, Lucy gave birth to a healthy baby boy after a long labor that left Robert pacing the downstairs like a caged animal, until the doctor finally called him up to meet his son. They named him James Henry Yates after both their fathers, and Robert cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion. "He's perfect," Robert whispered, looking down at the tiny red face. "Absolutely perfect." Lucy, exhausted but happy, watched her husband cradle their son with a gentleness that made her fall in love with him all over again. This was her family now, this man and this child, and the life they were building together on this ranch in Montana. James proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's dark hair. Lucy and Robert settled into the rhythms of parenthood, taking turns walking the floor when James was fussy, marveling at every small milestone, and supporting each other through the exhaustion and occasional frustrations that came with caring for an infant. As James grew from baby to toddler, Robert taught him about the ranch, carrying him out to see the horses and cattle, showing him the wide Montana sky and the rolling hills that would one day be his inheritance. Lucy taught him his letters and numbers, sang him songs, and told him stories of far-off places, though she never regretted that her own wandering days were over. 3 years after James was born, Lucy gave Robert a daughter. They named her Sarah Marie, and she had her father's sandy hair and her mother's green eyes. Robert was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, and Lucy often found him holding Sarah while doing ranch work, the baby strapped to his chest in a sling Lucy had sewn. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Lucy's careful bookkeeping and Robert's hard work and good instincts for ranching made them one of the more successful operations in the area. They expanded their herd, bought more land, and built a larger barn. The ranch house itself was expanded too, with more bedrooms added for the growing family and a proper parlor where Lucy could entertain the neighbors who had become friends. Life was not without its challenges. There were harsh winters where they lost cattle to the cold, dry summers where the creek ran low and worry about water was constant, and the usual struggles of making a living from the land. But through it all, Lucy and Robert faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Robert surprised Lucy with a new piano he had ordered all the way from Denver. It had taken months to arrive and cost more money than was probably wise to spend, but he had remembered Lucy mentioning once that she had learned to play as a girl and missed it. "Robert, it's too much," Lucy protested, though her eyes were shining as she ran her fingers over the polished wood. "Nothing is too much for you," Robert replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "You took a chance on a lonely rancher who woke you up in a stable with breakfast and a crazy proposal. The least I can do is give you a piano." Lucy turned in his arms and kissed him soundly. "That lonely rancher gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, and a love I never thought I'd find. I'm the lucky one, Robert Yates." "We're both lucky," Robert said. "Now play something for me. I want to hear you." Lucy sat down at the piano and began to play, tentatively at first as her fingers remembered the keys, then with more confidence. The music filled the house, and soon James and Sarah came running to see what was making such beautiful sounds. Robert sat in his chair, his children climbing on him, his wife making music, and thought that there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be. 2 years later, Lucy gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Elizabeth. The house was suddenly very full and very loud, but neither Lucy nor Robert would have had it any other way. They hired more help for both the house and the ranch, as Robert's operation had grown large enough to need several full-time ranch hands. Robert's 2 original hands, both of whom had been at his wedding to Lucy all those years ago, were still with him, and they had become like family. They doted on the children, taught James and Thomas to ride, and treated Lucy with the utmost respect. The ranch had become more than just a business. It was a community, a family that extended beyond just blood. As the children grew older, Lucy and Robert made sure they understood the value of hard work, but also the importance of education and kindness. James showed an early aptitude for working with the horses, while Sarah surprised everyone with her head for numbers and took over helping her mother with the books by the time she was 10. The twins were still young enough to be more interested in play than work, but they were being raised with the same values their older siblings had learned. Paradise itself grew over the years. What had been a small frontier town when Lucy first arrived was becoming a real community with a proper school, several churches, a bank, and various businesses. Lucy became involved in the town's social life, helping to organize fundraisers for the school and the church, hosting gatherings at the ranch, and becoming known as someone who would help anyone in need, remembering all too well what it felt like to be desperate and alone. One autumn day, nearly 15 years after Lucy had first fallen asleep in Robert's stable, a young woman arrived in Paradise on the stagecoach with a worn bag and a look of desperation that Lucy recognized instantly. She had come looking for work but found none available, and Lucy saw her in town looking lost and afraid. "Excuse me," Lucy said, approaching the young woman gently. "My name is Lucy Yates. You look like you could use some help." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, explained her situation. It was painfully familiar, a position lost, money gone, nowhere to turn. Lucy made a decision immediately. "My husband and I run a ranch just outside of town. We could use help with the house and the children if you're interested. Room and board plus a fair wage. Nothing untoward, I promise you. Just honest work." Margaret's eyes filled with tears of relief, and Lucy reached out to squeeze her hand. "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid in a strange place. Let me help you." That evening, Lucy told Robert about Margaret over dinner. He listened, then smiled at his wife. "You have the kindest heart of anyone I've ever known. Of course she's welcome here. We have the space, and Lord knows you could use the help with 4 children and this big house. I just kept thinking about how that could have been me if you hadn't offered me a chance all those years ago," Lucy said. "I want to pay that kindness forward." Robert reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you ever regret it, saying yes to a stranger's proposal?" Lucy laughed. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Robert Yates. You and our children and this life we've built. I was so scared that morning when you woke me up with breakfast. I thought you were going to throw me out, and instead you offered me the world." "I offered you a struggling ranch and a lot of uncertainty," Robert corrected. "You offered me hope," Lucy said, "and you gave me love. Everything else we built together." Robert brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I fell in love with you that very first morning, I think. Watching you try to maintain your dignity even though you were scared and hungry, seeing the strength in you even when you thought you had nothing left. I knew I wanted you in my life, whatever it took. I fell in love with you slower," Lucy admitted, "but no less deeply. Every day I discover new reasons to love you, new reasons to be grateful that fate brought me to your stable that night." As the years continued to pass, Lucy and Robert watched their children grow into fine young adults. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, working side by side with his father and eventually bringing home a wife of his own, a spirited young woman named Catherine, who reminded Robert a bit of Lucy when she was younger. Sarah, brilliant with numbers and blessed with her mother's determination, surprised everyone by deciding she wanted to go to college. It was still unusual for a woman, especially in Montana, but Lucy and Robert supported her decision fully. She went to study mathematics and came back with a teaching certificate, eventually starting a school for girls in Paradise that became quite respected. Thomas stayed on the ranch, content to work the land and live a simple life, while Elizabeth married the son of one of the neighboring ranchers, uniting 2 of the most successful operations in the region. Lucy and Robert became grandparents, then grandparents many times over as their children had families of their own. The ranch house that had once echoed with emptiness was now always full of life and laughter, with children and grandchildren constantly coming and going. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 30 people there, all connected to Robert and Lucy through blood or through the bonds of love and loyalty they had built over the years. Margaret, who had come to them as a desperate young woman, was there with her own husband and children. She had met him while working at the ranch and had stayed in Paradise to build her own life. As Lucy looked around at all these people, all these lives that had been touched by the choice she made 3 decades ago to accept a stranger's proposal, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Lucy and Robert took a walk out to the stable where it had all begun. It had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, but it was still the same place where Lucy had fallen asleep all those years ago, desperate and alone. "Do you remember the exact spot where you were sleeping?" Robert asked, his arm around Lucy's shoulders. "Right over there," Lucy said, pointing to a corner stall. "I thought the hay there looked the cleanest and most comfortable." "I'd been watching you for 2 nights," Robert confessed. "Trying to work up the courage to approach you. I kept thinking about what to say, how to help without scaring you off. And you decided on a marriage proposal," Lucy teased. "Well, I figured go big or go home," Robert replied with a grin. "And it worked, didn't it?" "It did," Lucy agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was so terrified that morning. I thought my life was over, that I'd run out of options and luck. And then you appeared with breakfast and the most insane proposal I'd ever heard, and somehow it felt right." "Best decision I ever made," Robert said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Well, that and deciding to come to Montana in the first place. If I'd stayed in Kansas, I never would have met you. We were meant to find each other, Lucy said firmly. I believe that. Out of all the places I could have ended up, all the stables I could have slept in, I ended up in yours. That's not just luck. That's fate. They stood there in the quiet of the stable, surrounded by the gentle sounds of horses settling for the night, and reflected on all the years that had brought them to this moment. The struggles and the triumphs, the joy and the sorrow, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments, all of it woven together into a life that neither of them could have imagined that morning when everything changed. As they grew older, Robert and Lucy gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving it in James and Thomas's capable hands. They spent their time with their grandchildren, working in the garden Lucy had cultivated over the years, and simply enjoying each other's company after a lifetime of partnership. Robert's hair turned silver, and the lines on his face deepened. But to Lucy, he was still the handsome stranger who had offered her hope when she had none. Lucy's dark hair became streaked with white, and her hands showed the effects of years of work. But to Robert she was still the beautiful woman who had taken a chance on him and made his house a home. They grew old together gracefully, still holding hands when they walked, still sharing a bed every night, still finding joy in the simple pleasure of being together. Their love, which had started from such an unlikely beginning, had proven stronger than either of them could have dreamed. When Robert was 72 and Lucy was 67, he fell ill with pneumonia one harsh winter. Lucy nursed him with the same determination she had brought to every challenge in their life together, and though the doctor was worried, Robert pulled through. But the illness left him weakened, and they both knew that their time was growing shorter. "Promise me something," Robert said one evening as they sat together by the fire, Lucy in her rocking chair and Robert in his favorite armchair, a blanket over his legs. "Anything," Lucy replied, looking up from the socks she was mending, though her fingers were not as nimble as they once were. "Promise me that you'll always remember that morning in the stable, that you'll remember that sometimes the craziest decisions turn out to be the best ones. That taking a chance on someone, on love, on life, is always worth it." "I could never forget," Lucy said, setting aside her mending and going to kneel beside his chair, taking his hand in hers. "That morning changed everything for me. You changed everything. You saved me, Robert." "We saved each other," Robert insisted, the same thing he had said so many years ago. "I was just as lost before you came along. You gave my life meaning and purpose beyond just work and survival." "We had a good life," Lucy said, her eyes misting over. "We had a great life," Robert corrected. "We have a great life, and it's not over yet, Lucy Yates. We've got more years ahead of us still." And they did have more years, though not as many as they might have hoped. Robert lived to be 75, passing peacefully in his sleep with Lucy beside him, her hand in his until the very end. She grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner for 38 years, but she did not despair. Instead, she remembered his request and chose to celebrate the incredible life they had built together. Lucy lived another 10 years after Robert's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, tending her garden, playing her piano, and telling stories of the early days of the ranch to anyone who would listen. She particularly loved telling the story of how she and Robert had met, of the morning he woke her up in the stable with breakfast, and a proposal that changed both their lives forever. "The moral of the story," she would tell her grandchildren as they sat at her feet, "is that you never know when your life is about to change. You never know when someone is going to come along and offer you exactly what you need, even if you didn't know you needed it. Stay open to possibilities. Take chances, and never be too proud to accept help when it's offered with a kind heart. When Lucy finally passed away in her sleep at the age of 77, she was laid to rest beside Robert on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn and to celebrate two lives well lived, two people who had loved each other deeply and built something lasting. The ranch continued through the generations, always staying in the family, and the story of Robert and Lucy became a family legend. The stable where Lucy had slept that fateful night was preserved, and eventually turned into a small museum of sorts, with old ranch tools and photos of the family over the years. And every year on the anniversary of Robert and Lucy's wedding, the family would gather there to remember and to celebrate the love story that had started it all. In the end, what had begun with a desperate woman sleeping in a stable and a lonely rancher with an unconventional solution had blossomed into a legacy of love, family, and community that touched countless lives. Lucy had come to paradise with nothing, and Robert had given her everything. But more than that, they had given each other the greatest gift of all, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a partnership that weathered every storm, and a family that would carry their memory and their values forward into the future. The story of the rancher who woke a sleeping stranger with breakfast and a proposal, and the woman brave enough to say yes, became the foundation upon which generations were built. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love, real love, is always worth the risk.